So today we're going to talk about Exodus um, as liberation theology. Before we begin, let's ground ourselves. First of all, Shavua Tov, happy Sunday. Right now, where I am, it is 5:30 in the evening in Eastern time. So let's ground ourselves in some gratitude. So thank you to the divine source of everything for giving us this new week, this new year, this new day. Um, and all of that. And I'm eternally grateful to be here. And on a sad note, but it's also gratitude. Our dog Bridget is in the hospital. She got sick, and luckily, she has pneumonia, but it could have been much worse. And she's 15, and even though that bill is going to be really high, I'm very grateful that she has something that's treatable. So I'm grateful for that. So I'm trying something new. Let me adjust this phone a little bit. Trying something new. I often think about a lot of things before I write them. So I've been thinking about this, and this wasn't the first time I've thought about it. I wrote a paper about this in medical school, but I was thinking about it more expansively. Um, so before I write it, or maybe I won't write it. I don't know, but I'm gonna talk to you all about it. All right. So let's get into it, as they say. So we've entered into the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And the word Shemot means names, and the book of Shemot begins with names. And so before God speaks, before Moses is even born, before liberation even feels possible, the Torah insists that people who will later be enslaved are already known, already counted, and already named. And that matters because before there is suffering, before there is resistance, and before there is freedom, there is dignity. And honestly, that alone is liberation theology. And so today we're going to talk about Shemot, the book of Exodus. And I believe the book of Exodus is the OG of liberation texts. I don't know if that's actually true or not, but as a Jew, as a rabbi, I feel that way. Um, long, I started thinking about this. I remember in 2008 when Obama was running for president, that may be one of the first times that liberation theology sort of came into our common vernacular. Um, and we often think about liberation theology as when it comes to Black liberation theology, and which causes me to say that Book of Exodus is the OG of liberation theology. So, one question to think about is, what does it mean for God to take sides in history? Just ponder that for a moment. Liberation theology must start in a particular place, and it must start with lived experience, with people trying to survive. Um, when we read the sacred text, we read it from where people are hurting, and from where people are struggling, and from where the cost of injustice is actually felt. That's what's happening in the book of Exodus. Liberation theology insists that God is not neutral and that suffering is not redemptive just because it exists. Shemot opens with taskmasters, quotas, forced labor, and state sanctioned violence. Remember, if you haven't read the book of Shemot, go read it or start reading it now. People in this text are forced to make bricks out of straw. Is that even possible? Anyway, forced to make bricks out of straw. Midwives are ordered to kill babies, and mothers are hiding their children. This book begins exactly where liberation theology says it must begin, with people under pressure. So let's talk about Pharaoh. Pharaoh's not just a man. It's not just a bad guy. Pharaoh is a system. The Torah says a new king arose who did not know Joseph. My friends, this isn't ignorance. This is not him not knowing history. He's rejecting history. It's a refusal to remember. It's a refusal for the system to remember. Um, and it's also a refusal of the system to feel obligated. Pharaoh looks at the demographic change and feels threatened. Remember the massive amounts of the Israelites are growing, and Pharaoh feels threatened. And Pharaoh says, there are too many, he says. And so he responds the way threatened power always does, with fear, with surveillance, with control over labor, with violence justified as necessary. Sound familiar? The demographic shift is framed as danger. You probably hear my dog in the background snoring. Anyway, the demographic shift is framed as danger. Control over who gets to move, who gets to belong, um, and who gets to live without fear. The Torah doesn't soften this. It names clearly the oppression is intentional. This is about policy, and organized exploitation always requires organized resistance. Now, the women. Before Moses shows up, before miracles, before revelation, there are women. The midwives, Shifra and Pua, refused to cooperate with the state violence. In fact, the first act of civil disobedience happens with the midwives refusing to kill the Israelite babies. Yocheved refuses to let her child disappear. Miriam watches, waits, and plans, and Pharaoh's daughter breaks ranks. Liberation begins with these quiet acts of refusal. And when Moses enters the picture, he doesn't invent liberation, he inherits it. When Moses finally enters the story, he's not ready. He's traumatized, he's angry, he kills someone, and he runs. Moses' story at the beginning is not a hero story, it's a survivor story. When God speaks to Moses from the burning bush, God doesn't say, I have evaluated the people and found them worthy. God says, I have heard the cry. The people are crying. They're not just praying, they're crying. Moses, as you know, has a stutter. Moses argues with God. He carries guilt and unfinished healing. And he's still called. Because liberation can't wait for people to be fully healed before they join the work. The movement needs people who show up, still learning, still struggling, and still carrying their wounds. God responds to pain before worthiness, and freedom is not earned, it's demanded. The people demand freedom. One of the ways oppression survives is through spiritualizing everything. We turn liberation into metaphor, freedom becomes eternal, Exodus becomes symbolic, but Shemot refuses all of that. Liberation here is physical. Bodies leave, people leave, labor stops, and ownership ends. Ownership of the people end. This is about people walking away from what was killing them. And the Torah is clear. God's holiness is bound up with dismantling exploitive systems. And theology that praises God while ignoring suffering is rejected in this text. One more thing I want to point out that um, freedom comes before the covenant. The Torah is not given in Mitzrayim. It's not given in Egypt. It's given in the wilderness, in the desert. Only after people are free do they receive the covenant. So only after we are free do we receive the covenant. Why? Because you cannot meaningfully consent while enslaved. You cannot say yes if you are not allowed to say no. Freedom comes first, responsibility comes after, and God does not give commandments to people who are still owned. So I'll close with this. Um, so what does Shemot Exodus ask of us now? Where have we mistaken survival for freedom? Where have we spiritualized suffering instead of confronting systems? Who are the Shifra and Puas of today? Judaism doesn't begin in abstraction. It begins in struggle. It begins with people and begins with God who hears crying. And liberation, real liberation, is never just something we remember. Because remember, we were asked to remember that we were enslaved in Egypt. But real liberation is never just something we remember. It's something we are still being asked to work toward. And whose cries are we willing to hear? So thank you all for listening. Maybe I'll turn this into a larger piece. So working on it. And one more question for this week. What would freedom require? Not someday. What would freedom require? Not someday, but right now. All right. No, I think I saw a question or two I might try to answer. Oh, Francesca said that she wrote about this uh, in her final. Oh, cool. That's cool. All right. Y'all have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and stay strong, um, stay healthy. I don't know what else to say. All right. Peace out. Oh, thank you for the hearts.